Oh, that explains it.
Do you?
Lightning 2, Spartan 3. Requesting gunship support for Iron Mountain convoy.
Spartan 3, Lightning 2. We've got RPG fire in your sector. Think you can clear that out first?
Copy that.
That's Kim, boys.
First squad, this is Spartan 3. Stand by for Frago. Got a lot of rocket fire coming from a house in your sector. Go check it out. Over. Copy that.
Insurgents are
Alright,
targeting.
boys, let's shut that shit down. Over.
After over a decade of cancellations, drops of support, change of publisher, and even a change of developers, much like the recently released Dead Island 2, the heavily embattled, hardcore-ish first-person shooter 6 Days in Fallujah has launched, albeit into an early access state. So with that, 6 Days in Fallujah has launched in early access from developers Highwire Games and publisher Victura. Both Highwire and Victura are new to the development and publishing of video games. Highwire announced the redevelopment of the 6 Days back in 2021 with Victura Publishing, which is a publisher that was founded in 2016. To put into perspective, neither have Wikipedia pages. So aside from bringing in veteran developers and leadership from Bungie who worked on Destiny, this is their first game and the first published title from these developers and publisher. The game really did have a tough time making it to market due to it being based on the Second Battle of Fallujah back in 2004 during the Iraq War. Konami was originally slated to publish the game for the original developer at the time, Atomic Games, but backed out in April of 2009 due to public backlash and wanting to go hands-off with the title, which was seen as a cash grab by some. Atomic Games said that they had a working game and were planning to go forth with releasing it, but after a few years of struggling to find the capital and platforms to release the game, 5 to 7 years after the real-life event of the game was based upon, Atomic Games shuttered and canceled the release in 2011. I remember a lot of vitriol and news outlets calling it nothing more than a marketing gimmick, despite the active participation and development help from former members of the military forces who took part in this operation. Despite the attempts to brand and advertise it as a survival horror of the atrocities and fear soldiers faced in this battle, it was met with naught but disdain, and this ultimately led to its cancellation and loss of financial backing. But here we are, over a decade later, and with a new team and a new publisher, the game is out in early access. The title didn't receive much more love than the original. Announced for revival back in 2021, the new studio was faced with death threats all the same for the development of the title. Funding issues and a lack of development manpower led to a delay, and then yet to another delay, with an early access release being announced earlier this year for release on June 22nd to be exact, so just a few days ago, a little over a week. Early access, as you can see in the background, does only have one mode, and that is the multiplayer cooperative version, Fireteam missions. This pits a team of 1 to 4 players against the enemy AI to complete a main overall objective and a series of changing objectives for each mission playthrough. Now, with how that is structured, it is sort of interesting and much like many games do have nowadays. You face the mission of something such as clearing out an enemy defensive hold and holding it for a time to achieve victory, rushing to aid a fire team pinned down in a building, and to defending your convoy that has fallen under attack from waves of enemies. From there is where it kind of branches out in its replayability. Different side objectives are given as you're progressing through your main objective. All of a sudden, you now have an enemy mortar team firing down upon your convoy, or an RPG team that's looking to destroy your vehicles. An enemy sniper is holed up in a tower, taking pop shots at you as you're trying to help the pinned down team, and you are not allowed to engage them. The maps are also procedurally generated in bits and pieces as well to keep replayability up. Building layout, building locations are all offering different instances in each map for each mode, while keeping major landmarks static for reference when receiving calls in-game about enemy movements or new objectives. The nitty-gritty of gameplay is that it's probably sim-adjacent. It's not quite as hardcore as full multiplayer sim shooters such as Squad or the Arma series, Red Orchestra, or even Hell Let Loose, but it's probably more in line with what you get in the co-op modes of Insurgency, Sad Storm, or Ready or Not. It's simmy enough to create tense situations where you can be suppressed, one bullet can end your life in that specific mission, and close quarters can be hectic and frantic at times. And those close quarter situations are what they really were focusing on here. Clearing buildings and rooms door to door, not necessarily knowing where the enemy is sitting waiting for you. If you or a teammate go around a corner without properly clearing your angles, that could be the end of the entire mission. Now, it is slightly forgiving in a few aspects. You can typically respawn a down teammate at least once each mission at your APC. You spawn all of them at once. Depending upon the damage you take from enemy fire, you can take a moment and heal yourself behind cover, or go and help a teammate who's healed and waiting to be healed, much like a revive mechanic in most modern games anymore. The enemy AR aren't really great shots, and if surprised, you usually do have a moment to react back in time to save yourself or your team. Now, gunplay does feel a little floaty, but then again, I've only ever played 3 of the available roles in the game, which are assigned randomly at the beginning of the match. You have your squad leader, who is given an ACOG as well as an underbarrel grenade launcher, recon, who also has a scope on the rifle, CQB, who is given a shotgun while their backup is a rifle, and the support, who is given an M249 saw and a sidearm, much like the other classes outside of CQB, who has that rifle in their side slot. Grenades and smoke grenades can also be used depending upon the situation if they're called for. I say the gunplay feels floaty, but maybe I'm just used to managing my fire in these sort of games. I typically switch to a single fire mode and play that way, and it feels a lot better when firing in single fire in this game. Maybe it's just because I'm used to the more arcadey styles of games, and I just wasn't used to switching immediately or having a visual cue on screen letting me know when I was in fact in single fire, but yeah, who knows. It feels fine to me if it's on single fire outside of shotguns. Shotguns do feel a little wonky to use.
I just fucking exploded.
It is what it is. When aiming, you do have a slightly zoomed in aim option and then a fully seated ADS option where you use the gun's full sight picture or scope. So that's a bit weird getting used to, but they're both good in different situations. Movement is relatively slow, more realistic. There's no jumping in like Call of Duty or Battlefield, but there is an option to mantle over objects or through windows. You can crouch, obviously. You figured you'd be able to dip behind cover if needed, but no ability to go prone, which makes sense in a more realistic environment when you're clearing rooms door to door. You can also lean around corners while both standing and while crouched to give yourself cover when engaging the enemy. Gameplay-wise, overall, with the small changing objectives here and there, thus a slightly procedurally generated level, it's fun. It was definitely fun to play and something you do need to communicate with your teammates on, as clearing buildings can and will be as deadly as crossing open spaces. The game is hard, but forgiving in certain aspects, and remains a tough enough task while not abandoning what makes a game, which is being fun to play. Visually, it looks good. It doesn't look great, or like it's pushing the envelope of graphics fidelity in a first-person shooter, but if you don't like the brown and yellow tones of the Middle Eastern setting of Fallujah, much like the average FPS game from the past 20 years or so, it's probably not going to be for you. Character models for both the player and AI both look good, but once again, not great. Same goes for vehicles as well as the weapons modeling. This isn't a real criticism, as the visual style and fidelity of the game perfectly suits the gameplay. Everything is clear when you're looking at it, and it's what I'd come to expect from a AA title. In the audio space, there's a few highlights, but overall more of the same from the visual side of things. Gun sounds, explosions, vehicles, they're all good, but not great. What little voice acting there is, typically at the beginning of each match, just giving you the overall objective, as well as at certain points throughout the match. If they're adding any other objectives or giving updates, it's there, it's present, it's not bad in any sense. There isn't much in the way of music either. What can be considered a background environmental track, which does serve its purpose in filling in the silence around the environmental sounds you'll come across in the destroyed buildings and parks, the yelling of the enemy insurgents, as well as the small arms fire from players and enemies. Outside of the in-game visuals and sounds, one really interesting thing that Highwire Games added were the loading screens as well as the game's intro cinematic and the firefight mission cinematic. I'm assuming the campaign and other modes will have these cinematics as well as they become available. To keep within scope of the original vision, they have micro-documentaries about the Second Battle of Fallujah at the intro of the game, which consist of interviews conducted with various members of the military who took part in this operation, interpreters, and special forces members who were in the area. The loading screens all consist of the picture of the person they interviewed as well as a quote from them. It's all greatly put together and really keeps within scope and keeps it targeted on what this game was supposed to be when it was initially scoped to be made, all the way up through the actual early access release. These were honestly very interesting, and I think there should really just be a full-blown documentary done from these interviews they have, as well as the footage that they do have available. Overall, can I recommend 6 Days in Fallujah? Well, that depends. It depends on a few factors, actually. The first being its release and its price. It has launched into early access with only one game mode, the co-op fireteam missions, and, well, also, that is the price of $39.99. Well, it's not a full price of a AAA game, that is the price of what we see fully released AA games going for currently, while this one is still in early access. We do have a content roadmap for the next 4 quarters, going through this time next year, promising to add new times of day for missions such as a night mission mode and dusk and dawn, new weather and visibility effects, new co-op missions, AI teammates and civilians mixed into the action to watch out for, as well as the campaign and the special operator missions. So the roadmap is filled out with content on the way, but it is an early access game, and a thing with early access games is sometimes the developer does just take the money, cut, and run because there's not enough income coming in or interest in the game has died off. It should be noted that as of this recording, the game is sitting at a very positive rating on Steam of 85%, and the all-time player count, though, is at 8,021, and the current player count is only 3,268. Low counts can kill the continued development of an early access title, like I stated, but I understand the need to release some sort of product to continue development. One other thing to consider is if you think a game based off what is considered one of the bloodiest modern conflicts we have today over the 6-day period is for you to play. In the end, this is a game that's designed to be a game, but it is paying homage to what members of the military, both the US and Iraqi forces, went through in this operation. Jury is still out on exactly how the campaign will play out, but if it's anything like the original, they're gonna go for a highly stressful and frantic close-quarters survival horror-like game where, rather than monsters or the supernatural, you're dealing with the horrors of battle where you have rules to abide by and the enemy does not. The original title was supposed to follow a squad of Marines clearing buildings door to door, and also follow a family's patriarch as he tries to lead his family out of the war zone. Lastly, if you enjoy a simulator FPS that's a little light in the simulator to create a game that is, what I think at least, fun to play repeatedly, matches last 10 to 20 minutes for success, less for failure. Communication and cooperation is absolutely needed from your team if you are to succeed. You can't run out on your own and hope to accomplish much. All in all, if you can get 2 or 3 friends to play with you regularly and pick up that extra person via in-game matchmaking, or just go with the 3 of you, or a full squad if you have 4, it's a good fit. 6 Days in Fallujah, at least in its early incarnation of early access, is fun, at times stressful but not necessarily in a bad way game, that gets your adrenaline going and feels rewarding when you do complete a mission. Its price tag, though, is at $39.99, which seems to be a bit high for an early access title, where we have other early access titles that recently came out, such as Starship Troopers, that launched at a much lower price point of $24.99. But in the end, the value here is, if you think you'll get your value out of a sim-light co-op shooter that does have a full roadmap ahead of it, it has been well received by its player base, and you're okay with forking over that $39.99 upfront fee.